Arrival in the mysterious village. The bus rumbled down the narrow dirt road, kicking up a trail of dust as it approached the small village of Ajaani. Inside, 5 young women in green and white NYSC uniforms clutched their bags tightly, their faces filled with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. They had heard stories about remote villages, some good, some terrifying, but nothing could have prepared them for what lay ahead. The moment the bus came to a halt, the door creaked open, and warm, sweet-smelling air rushed in. The scent of ripe mangoes, damp earth, and burning firewood wrapped around them like an unseen presence. Outside, villagers stood in clusters, waiting eagerly. The first to step down was Adanna, the boldest of them all. Her eyes scanned the crowd with curiosity. Behind her, Chika, Bimbo, and Zainab followed, dragging their suitcases into the soft red soil. A tall woman with dark skin and a radiant smile approached them, holding a tray of freshly roasted yams and groundnut paste. "Welcome, my daughters," she said warmly. "You are home now." Other villagers surrounded them, offering baskets filled with plantains, kola nuts, and colorful beads. Bimbo, the quietest of the group, whispered, "They treat us like royalty." Zainab adjusted her headscarf, a small smile forming. "I've never seen people so welcoming. It feels different." A young girl of about 10 years old stood beside them, wide-eyed and excited. She had a small calabash tied to her waist, and she clutched a woven doll in her hands. "Are you the ones from the big city?" she asked shyly. Adanna grinned. "Yes, we are." "What's your name?" "Kemi," the girl replied proudly. "I can show you around if you want." Before Adanna could respond, a deep voice boomed from the village square. "Make way for the Oba." The crowd parted as an elderly man dressed in flowing white robe stepped forward. His beard, as white as the clouds above, cascaded down his chest like rivers of wisdom. His golden crown gleamed under the setting sun, and a staff carved with ancient symbols rested in his hand. The 5 core members instinctively bowed their heads in respect. "Welcome to Ajaani, my daughters," Oba Iken said, his voice as steady as the earth beneath their feet. "You are now part of our home, and we are honored to have you here." The villagers cheered, clapping and singing in celebration. But just as the joyous noise filled the air, an unsettling silence fell over the gathering when another figure stepped forward. He was thin and wiry, with a necklace of cowrie shells dangling from his neck. His wrinkled face was marked with faded tribal scars, and his dark eyes held a knowledge that seemed older than time itself. This was Baba Oran, the village priest. He raised his hand, and the villagers grew still. Oba Ikan nodded solemnly. "There is one thing you must understand about our village," he said, his eyes serious now. "You are welcome here. You will be treated as our own. But there are rules." Baba Oran stepped closer, his gaze piercing through each of the young women. His voice, though calm, carried a warning that sent a chill down their spines. "This land is protected by the spirits. There is a forest beyond the hills, a place untouched by man. It is called Igbo Ijo, the Forbidden Forest. No one must enter it. Not even by mistake." Chika swallowed hard. "Why?" Oba Ikan's face darkened. "Because those who do, never return the same." A heavy silence settled over the core members. The words echoed in their minds, unsettling yet intriguing. Baba Oran turned his eyes to them once more. "Respect our ways, and you will live in peace. Disobey, and the spirits will take what is theirs." Adanna, ever the skeptic, smirked slightly. She glanced at her friends and saw the same thought reflected in their eyes. Superstition. Just another village tale. Ife nudged her gently. "You believe that?" Adanna shrugged. "Every village has its stories." As night fell, the core members were led to their new home, a cozy, mud-walled house near the village square. Their bellies were full, their hands adorned with gifts, and their hearts warmed by the kindness of the villagers. But as they lay in their beds, listening to the distant laughter of the villagers and the rustling of trees beyond the hills, one thought refused to leave their minds. What is really inside the forbidden forest? They had no way of knowing that the answer would change their lives forever. The temptation of the forbidden. The warm glow of lanterns flickered across the village square as the night breeze carried the scent of roasting maize and burning firewood. The villagers gathered in a large circle, their faces illuminated by the golden flames of a bonfire at the center. Tonight was a special night, a storytelling night, where the elders and children shared the legends passed down through generations. The 5 core members, Adanna, Ife, Chika, Bimbo, and Zainab, sat among the villagers, their expressions a mix of amusement and curiosity. They had been in Ajaani for nearly 2 weeks now, settling into their routines, teaching at the local school, and embracing the warmth of the community. Yet, despite their busy days, one thing never left their minds. The forbidden forest. "Come forward, Kemi," called one of the elders, gesturing to the young girl who had welcomed the core members on their first day. Kemi, dressed in a bright Ankara gown, stepped into the firelight, holding her woven doll close. Her small face was serious, her eyes glowing with excitement. The villagers leaned in, eager to hear the tale she was about to tell. "Tonight," Kemi began, her voice surprisingly strong, "I will tell you about Igbo Ijo, the forbidden forest." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Some of the older villagers lowered their gazes, while the younger ones clutched their parents' arms. Adanna raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Kemi continued, her voice dropping into a whisper. "The forest is alive," she said. "It sees. It listens. It remembers." The villagers nodded solemnly. "They say if you go too deep, the trees shift, closing the path behind you. You will hear voices, soft, sweet voices calling your name. But if you answer..." Kemi paused, her expression darkening. "You will forget who you are. The whispers will steal your name, and without your name, you can never live." Zainab shuddered, hugging herself. "But that's not all," Kemi went on, her small fingers gripping her doll tighter. "Some villagers say they have seen spirits with glowing eyes, and others tell of men walking in the shadows, men without heads." A sharp gasp echoed from one of the listeners. Even the flickering flames seemed to dim slightly at her words. "They are the lost ones," Kemi whispered. "Those who entered the forest and never came out the same." For a moment, the square fell silent. Then, Adanna chuckled. The sound was small at first, then louder, drawing the attention of the villagers. Ife nudged her, but Adanna ignored it, shaking her head with amusement. "Come on," she said. "Ghost. Headless men. Trees that can steal your name. They are just trying to scare us." Kemi's face fell, and several villagers glared at Adanna. Baba Oran, the village priest, who had been sitting near the fire, sighed and muttered something under his breath. "Believe what you will," an elder woman said sharply. "But do not mock what you do not understand." The core members exchanged glances. The tension in the air was thick. I didn't mean to offend anyone," Adanna said, raising her hands. "I just think, well, there has to be a reason why no one has actually explored the forest, right?" "You think we are afraid?" an elderly man asked, his deep-set eyes locked onto hers. "Maybe," Adanna replied carefully. The villagers shook their heads. "We are not afraid," Baba Oran finally spoke, his voice as calm as the night air. "We are respectful." The core members fell silent. The storytelling night continued, but the 5 women couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that hung in the air. They whispered there. Later that night, the core members sat outside their mud-walled house, staring up at the moon. The village square had gone quiet, with only the distant hum of night creatures filling the air. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, leaving only darkness beyond the scattered lanterns. Adanna, resting against the wooden wall of their home, sighed. "I don't know about you all," she said, "but I think we're missing a big opportunity." Ife frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Adanna said, leaning forward, "we're educated. We've been taught to think critically. What if all this talk about the forbidden forest is just some old superstition? Or what if it isn't?" Zainab shot back, crossing her arms. Adanna ignored her. "Look, I'm not saying we go deep inside or anything crazy. Just a quick look. A few steps past the trees. Just to see if there's anything really strange about it." Chika shifted uncomfortably. "We promised we wouldn't go." Adanna smirked. "Promised who?" "Some old man with cowrie shells." "That old man is their priest," Ife said. "We should respect their beliefs." Adanna waved a dismissive hand. "Respect is fine. But curiosity is human nature." She turned to the group, her voice dropping into a persuasive whisper. "No one has to know. We slip in, take a quick look, and come right back. 5 minutes. That's it." The others exchanged uneasy glances. Bimbo bit her lip. "But what if the stories are true?" Adanna shrugged. "If they were true, wouldn't someone have actual proof by now?" Silence. Then, one by one, they nodded. Zainab was the last to agree, exhaling sharply. "Fine. But only for 5 minutes." Adanna grinned. "Deal." As they sat under the vast, starry sky, none of them noticed the way the trees in the distance swayed without wind. The forest had heard them. And it was waiting, crossing the line. The sun burned high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the village of Ajaani. The afternoon heat made everything still. Villagers rested in their homes, children napped under shady trees, and even the market square was quiet. It was the perfect time to slip away unnoticed. Adanna, Ife, Chika, Bimbo, and Zainab gathered near the back of their mud-walled home, their hearts pounding with excitement and fear. "Are we really doing this?" Zainab whispered, adjusting her headscarf. "It's now or never," Adanna said with a grin. 5 minutes, in and out. They moved quickly but cautiously, slipping through the narrow paths behind the village huts. The trees in the distance loomed ahead, tall and motionless, as if waiting. When they reached the forest edge, they paused. The forbidden forest. It stretched before them, lush, inviting, and untouched, with thick green vines hanging from enormous trees. The ground was covered in a carpet of fallen leaves, and golden light filtered through the canopy, giving everything a magical glow. Bimbo let out a breath. "It's beautiful." Adanna smirked. "Told you. Nothing scary here." Yet, Ife muttered under her breath. "Come on," Adanna urged, stepping in first. One by one, the others followed. At first, everything was peaceful. The trees stood tall, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze. Flowers bloomed in colors they had never seen before, deep blues, glowing purples, fiery oranges. Strange butterflies with golden wings fluttered past them. "This doesn't feel cursed," Chika murmured, touching the bark of a tree. But then, everything changed. The shift. The deeper they walked, the more the forest began to feel wrong. The golden sunlight dimmed, replaced by a pale, bluish glow that made their skin look almost ghostly. The air grew colder, wrapping around them like unseen fingers. The sweet scent of flowers soured, turning into something musty and damp, like decaying leaves after a heavy rain. The trees looked different now, taller, darker, and twisted, their branches reaching like claws toward the sky. Zainab shivered. "I don't like this. Let's turn back." Adanna hesitated, but before she could reply, something whispered her name. Adanna. She spun around. Who said that? The others stopped. Said what? Ife asked, frowning. Someone called me. A cold breeze rushed past them. Then it happened again. Chika. Chika gasped. I heard it. Bimbo took a shaky step backward. Who's there? No one answered. Only the windless silence of the forest. Then, the whispers grew louder. Ife. Bimbo. Zainab. The voices came from everywhere and nowhere, soft, beckoning, familiar yet strange. Run, Zainab whispered. They turned, their feet crunching over the dead leaves, but the path was gone. The way they had come in, once bright and clear, was now nothing but thick, endless trees. Ife spun in circles. No, 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 it was just here. Chika pressed her back against a tree, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Guys, Bimbo whispered, we are trapped. Adanna clenched her fist, forcing down the rising panic. No. There has to be another way. She grabbed a fallen branch and marked an X into the soft earth beneath her feet. Let's keep walking. We'll find another exit. They walked. And walked. And walked. But the X appeared in front of them again. As if they had never left. Ife clutched Adanna's arm. We are going in circles. Zainab let out a horrified sob. This isn't real. This can't be real. The whispers grew louder, calling around them like smoke. Then, deep within the trees, something moved. A shadow, tall, thin, headless. Watching. Waiting. The forest had them now. And it wasn't letting go. The forest's wrath. The core members stood frozen, their breathing shallow and ragged. The once beautiful forest had twisted into something dark and unnatural, its trees looming over them like silent judges. The whispers had stopped, but the silence was worse, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Then, Chika saw it. At first, it was just a shadow moving between the trees. Slow. Uneven. Then it stepped into view. A man, or at least, something shaped like one. But he had no head. His body swayed with every step, his chest rising and falling as if he were breathing, yet where his head should have been, there was only air. His hands twitched, fingers stretching as though searching for something unseen. Chika's blood ran cold. She opened her mouth to scream, but nothing came out. Then, as if sensing them, the headless figure stopped. Slowly, it turned. And began walking toward them. Chika screamed. The others spun around, their eyes widening in terror as the figure picked up speed, moving with unnatural grace, its bare feet never making a sound. Run! Adanna shouted. They bolted, their legs pounding against the earth as terror ignited their veins. The trees seemed to shift and bend around them, the once solid ground now feeling unsteady beneath their feet. But just as they saw an opening ahead, an escape route, they hit something hard. Ife was the first to slam into it, the impact sending her sprawling onto the ground. Chika crashed into her, then Zainab, then Bimbo. Adanna stumbled back, clutching her forehead. A wall. A smooth, black, endless wall had appeared before them, stretching as far as the eye could see. It was too tall to climb, and no matter how much they pushed or struck it, it didn't budge. It was as if the forest itself had sealed them in. No. No. This can't be happening. Ife cried, pounding her fist against the wall. Adanna turned, her heart hammering against her ribs. The headless man was still coming. And he wasn't alone. From the shadows of the trees, other figures emerged. Some crawled on all fours, their bodies distorted and elongated like something pulled out of a nightmare. Their eyes glowed a sickly yellow, flickering like dying lanterns. Some walked like humans, but their skin was too pale, too stretched, as if they had been left in the sun for centuries. Others had no faces at all. And they were all coming toward them. The core members huddled together, their backs pressed against the cold, unyielding wall. "What do we do?" Zainab sobbed, gripping Chika's hand so tightly her nails dug into her skin. Bimbo clutched her chest, whispering prayers under her breath. "Please, please, please," Ife whimpered, rocking back and forth. Adanna's hands shook, but she forced herself to think. There had to be a way out. Didn't there? The creatures drew closer, their glowing eyes fixed on them. Then, without warning, the ground disappeared beneath Bimbo. 1 second she was standing beside them, the next, she was falling. "Bimbo!" Ife shrieked, lunging forward. The others dropped to their knees, reaching for her as she tumbled into the darkness below. But the moment their hands touched her, they passed right through her. It was like she was a shadow, slipping through their fingers like smoke. Bimbo's eyes widened in horror as she vanished into the pit below. Her scream echoed long after she was gone. Then, silence. A silence so deep it felt like the forest itself was holding its breath. The creatures stopped, their glowing eyes fixed on the remaining core members. Adanna's fingernails dug into the dirt, her mind racing. They had lost Bimbo. And if they didn't find a way out soon, they would be next. The village in chaos. The village of Ajaani had always been a place of peace. The mornings were filled with the sounds of children laughing, and the evenings carried the sweet scent of roasting maize and burning firewood. But today, something was wrong. The sky turns dark. At first, it was subtle. The bright afternoon sun dimmed behind thick clouds, turning the sky an unnatural shade of grey. The birds that usually filled the trees fell silent. The goats and chickens near the market scattered, their restless cries echoing through the village. Then, the wind came. It wasn't the usual evening breeze. This wind howled, wild and furious, like a storm with no rain. It rattled doors, knocked over baskets, and tore through the village like unseen hands pulling at everything in sight. People stepped out of their homes, their faces filled with confusion. Then came the wailing. A sound unlike anything they had ever heard, a chorus of voices, crying, pleading. But it didn't come from the village. It came from the wind itself. It was distant, almost ghostly, but clear enough to chill the blood of anyone who heard it. Then, in the middle of the square, Baba Oran came running. His cowrie shell necklace clinked against his chest, and his staff hit the ground hard as he approached the palace. His face, usually calm and unreadable, was filled with urgency and fear. "Your Majesty," he shouted as he pushed his way inside. Oba Iken, who had been sitting on his ornate wooden throne, stood immediately. "Baba Oran," the king said, his deep voice firm, "what troubles you?" The priest's eyes were dark with worry. "The forest gods are angry." The room fell into silence. The elders, gathered in the palace for their afternoon deliberations, exchanged nervous glances. "The wind," one of them whispered. "The voices in the air." Oba Ikan stepped down from his throne. "What do you mean, Baba?" Baba Oran exhaled heavily. "I have lived many years. I have seen when the spirits stir. This." He gestured towards the open doors where the wind continued to howl. "This is their warning. Something has disturbed the balance." A feeling of dread settled in the king's chest. Then, a small voice rang from the doorway. "It's my fault." The room turned to see Kemi standing at the entrance. The young girl clutched her woven doll, her eyes brimming with tears. Oba Ikon took a step forward. Child, what do you mean? Kemi fell to her knees. The core members. Adanna, Ife, Chika, Bimbo, and Zainab, they asked me for directions to the forbidden forest, she whispered. I told them how to get there. Gasps filled the room. You did what? One of the elders thundered. I didn't know they would actually go. Kemi sobbed, her small shoulders shaking. Baba Oran closed his eyes. The spirits do not cry out for nothing. If they enter the forest. He paused, his grip on his staff tightening. They are in grave danger. The king's face hardened. Then we must bring them back. Preparing the rescue. The village erupted into chaos. Mothers clutched their children, whispering prayers of protection. The men gathered in the square, each one looking toward the palace, awaiting orders. Oba Ikon stood at the center, his voice booming over the wind. We do not leave our own to the mercy of the spirits. We will go to the forest and bring them back. The villagers cheered, but Baba Oran raised a hand. Your Majesty, he said gravely, we cannot simply walk into the forest. The gods have claimed them. If we enter unprepared, we may never return. Oba Ikon nodded. Then what must be done? Baba Oran turned to the villagers. Gather the sacred items. We will need white chalk, palm oil, and the blood of a pure animal. The spirits must be appeased before we step foot beyond the trees. The villagers scattered, moving quickly. The men lit torches, while the women prepared offerings of kola nuts, bitter leaf, and dried fish, gifts for the forest gods. Then, Baba Oran raised his arms and began to chant. His voice rose and fell, carrying through the village like a song as old as time itself. The sky, once dark and brooding, rumbled in response. The spirits were listening. At the edge of the forest. By the time the villagers reached the boundary of Igbo Ijo, night had fallen. The trees loomed tall, casting twisted shadows on the ground. The wind had died down, but the silence that followed was even worse. Oba Ikon, holding a burning torch, stepped forward. Baba Oran, he said quietly, is it time? Baba Oran nodded. He dipped his fingers into the bowl of palm oil, marking a symbol of protection on the king's forehead, then did the same for the warriors. Then he stepped forward, planting his staff into the ground. And began to speak to the forest. O spirits of Igbo Ijo, we come in peace. They are our daughters. Our own. They have trespassed, but they are young and foolish. Forgive them. Release them. The villagers joined in, their voices rising in a chorus of pleading and prayers. The flames of the torches flickered violently, as if caught in an unseen force. Then, the wind returned. But this time, it wasn't a howl. It was a whisper. The villagers held their breath, listening. Then, a scream. A single, distant scream. Coming from deep within the forest. Baba Oran turned sharply to Oba Ikon. They are still alive. Oba Ikon clenched his jaw. Then we go in. With torches burning bright, the villagers stepped beyond the boundary. The forest welcomed them. And the spirits watched in silence. A fate worse than death. The forest was silent. The core members lay motionless on the damp earth, their bodies weak, their minds empty. The creatures that had once surrounded them were gone, melted into the shadows of Igbo Ijo. But their presence lingered, in the stillness, in the coldness that seeped into the bones of those who had trespassed. Adanna opened her eyes first. A strange glow flickered in the distance, pulsating like a dying star. It wasn't fire, and it wasn't the moon. It was something else. Something watching them. Ife. Chika. Zainab. She tried to whisper, but her throat was raw. The others stirred, their bodies stiff as if waking from a long nightmare. Bimbo, however, was gone. "Where's Bimbo?" Ife croaked, her voice barely a whisper. No one had an answer. Then, without warning, the wind roared. It slammed into them with unseen force, knocking them backward. The trees shook violently, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. The ground rumbled beneath them. Then, everything went black. The village shrine. When Adanna opened her eyes again, she was no longer in the forest. She was lying on a straw mat, the scent of burning incense thick in the air. Her body felt heavy, as if she had been buried under a mountain. Slowly, she turned her head. Ife, Chika, and Zainab lay beside her, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. They were in the village shrine. The walls were lined with dried herbs and sacred markings, and in the center, Baba Oran sat cross-legged, his staff resting in his lap. Oba Ikan and the elders stood behind him, their faces unreadable. It took a moment for Adanna to understand what had happened. They had been saved. But Bimbo was missing. She forced herself to sit up. "Bimbo." Baba Oran raised a hand, silencing her. "The forest has taken its price," he said solemnly. "Bimbo is gone." A choked sob escaped from Zainab, who covered her face with trembling hands. "But we survived," Ife whispered, looking down at her legs. "We made it out." Baba Oran's face darkened. "You did not escape," he said. "You were allowed to live. There is a difference." A cold shiver ran through Adanna. She looked at her friends, really looked at them. Something was wrong. Ife sat stiffly, her hands gripping the straw mat beneath her. She tried to stand, but her legs did not move. She gasped, her fingers clawing at her thighs. I can't feel my legs," she cried, terror creeping into her voice. Chika sat beside her, silent. Not out of shock, but because she couldn't speak. Her mouth opened and closed, her eyes wide with horror, but no sound came out. Zainab hugged herself, rocking slightly, whispering prayers under her breath. And then, Adanna caught sight of her own reflection in the bowl of water beside her. Her once dark, beautiful cows were now completely white. A tremor ran through her body. The forest had marked them. Forever. The final judgment. Baba Oran rose to his feet. "The gods have spared you, but you are no longer who you were." Oba Ikan stepped forward, his voice heavy with sorrow. "You belong to the forest now," he said. "If you ever try to leave Ajaani, you will die." The words hung in the air, suffocating. Ife let out a heart-wrenching wail, pounding her fist against the ground. Chika, silent and broken, simply stared ahead, as if trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Adanna swallowed hard. She had always thought of herself as fearless, strong, curious. But now, all she felt was regret. They had only wanted to see the truth. They had only wanted to prove the stories wrong. But some truths were never meant to be uncovered. Some rules were never meant to be broken. And now, they would never leave this place. The tale that never faded. The days passed, then months. The villagers cared for them, fed them, gave them shelter. But they were no longer outsiders, they were cursed daughters of Ajaani. They watched the seasons change, the village thrive, while they remained the same, trapped, bound by an invisible chain that could never be broken. Their story spread through the village, told by elders to children under the moonlit sky. Remember the core members who entered the forbidden forest. Remember what happened to them. Curiosity brings suffering. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. And so, their names became legend. A warning. A reminder. That some places are not meant for man. And some fates are worse than death.